The rubber of my wheels absorbed the sound. On the hardwood floor. I was supposed to be at the design firm until 6. But a canceled client meeting sent me back to the silence of suburbia early. That silence shattered the moment I rolled near the kitchen. I've been in a wheelchair since a childhood accident. I came home early and heard my mom say, "He still doesn't know." My brother replied, "If he learns the truth, we're finished." I stayed silent and shocked them both. My hands locked onto the push rims, friction burning my palms. It wasn't just the words, it was the tone. Julian's voice usually carried the confident resonance of a man who never faced a real consequence. Now, it sounded thin, like dry leaves skittering on pavement. Mom didn't sound like a mother protecting her child. She sounded like a conspirator arranging an alibi. I held my breath, chest tight against the strap of my messenger bag, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Julian was visiting from the city, probably to borrow money or brag about a promotion. He was the golden boy who walked on 2 legs. The one carried the family name forward, without the tragedy attached to it. For 19 years, I had been the object of their pity. The broken thing they nursed with suffocating care. But hearing them now, the dynamic shifted violently. They weren't pitying me. They were afraid of me. The realization turned my blood cold. I didn't burst into the room. A younger version of me might have screamed for an explanation. But life in a chair teaches you patience. Instead, I gripped the wheels and reversed. Inch by careful inch, I rolled backward down the hallway. The vintage Persian rug muffled the movement, aiding my escape. I needed to reach my room before they emerged. If I confronted them now, they would just lie again. I needed to be smarter than they were. Inside my bedroom, I closed the door until the latch clicked softly. The sound felt like a gunshot in the quiet house. I stared at the walls covered in my architectural sketches. Structures built on logic, physics, and transparency. My family was a structure too, but I had just found a crack in the foundation. If he learns the truth. That phrase replayed in my mind on a sick loop. It implied that the drunk driver story, the rainy night, the hit, run. It was all a complete fabrication. My reflection in the mirror looked the same, but the person behind the eyes had changed. I wasn't just a survivor anymore, I was a liability. Outside my door, I heard footsteps moving toward the living room. Julian laughed at something Mom said. A nervous, forced sound that scraped against my nerves. I didn't wheel out to join them. I sat in the gathering dusk, listening to the house settle. The silence wasn't peace anymore. It was the holding of breath before a scream. I rolled into the dining room, as if nothing had happened. My mother was serving roast chicken, the smell of rosemary thick in the air. It usually comforted me, but tonight it felt cloying. Julian poured wine. His hand steady, his smile bright. He asked about my project. I lied smoothly. I watched them eat, dissecting their movements. Mom's eyes darted to the hallway every few minutes. Julian chewed too fast. They looked like actors who had forgotten their lines, but kept smiling anyway. Dinner ended with a polite excuse about a headache. Back in my room, I locked the door again. I didn't turn on the main light. The glow from the street lamp outside cut across my desk. I pulled the bottom drawer open. Underneath a stack of old sketchbooks lay a dusty shoebox. It was my archive of pain. Get well cards, a jagged piece of plastic from the wreck, and a single business card. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. I dug through the layers of colored paper until I found it. The card was bent at the corner. The white cardstock yellowed by time. Officer Vincent Reese. It read. He had been the first face I saw that night. I remember the rain on his uniform and the way he held my hand while they cut the metal. He had visited me in the hospital twice. He seemed kind then. Now, I wondered if his kindness was actually just guilt. My phone felt heavy, like a weapon I didn't know how to use. It was late, almost 9. Calling a cop on his personal cell, after 2 decades, was desperate. But the silence was suffocating. I could hear the television downstairs. They were watching a sitcom, laughing at canned jokes, while I sat upstairs holding the detonator to our lives. I tapped the number into the keypad before I could reconsider. My thumb hovered over the green button. I pressed it. The line rang 4 times. I expected voicemail. Then, a rough voice answered. "Yeah, this is Reese." The sound of it transported me back 19 years. "Officer Reese?" I asked. "This is Felix. Felix Thorne." There was a long pause on the other end. I heard a chair scrape against a floor, and the background noise of a bar or a game fade away. "Felix," he said. His voice shifted instantly. It wasn't confusion. It was immediate, terrified recognition. "I didn't think you'd remember me," I said, keeping my voice low. "I remember every accident." "Kid," he replied. The nickname stung. I wasn't a kid anymore. I was a man who suspected his entire history was a fiction. "I need to ask you about that night," I said. "The police report said it was a hit and run. A drunk driver." The silence returned, thicker than before. I could hear him breathing. He wasn't denying it. He was calculating. "I can't talk about this on the phone," Reese said finally. His tone had hardened. The warmth of the hospital visits was gone, replaced by the cold wariness of a man protecting a pension. "Meet me at the diner on 4th in 2 days. Morning. Don't bring anyone." The line went dead before I could agree. I stared at the screen. He didn't say I was crazy. He didn't say read the report. He just confirmed that the official story was dangerous. The diner smelled of burnt bacon and floor wax. I parked at a corner table, watching the door. It was a tactical choice I hadn't realized I was making until I did it. 2 days of waiting had shredded my nerves. At 9, the bell above the door jingled. Vincent Reese walked in. He looked heavier than I remembered, gray hair cropped close, wearing a jacket that had seen better decades. He didn't look like a hero anymore. He looked tired. He slid into the booth without shaking hands. His eyes flicked to my wheelchair, then away to the laminated menu. Guilt has a specific weight, and he was carrying it in his shoulders. "You look good, Felix?" He lied. "Considering." I didn't blink. "I am not here for a checkup. I want to know why my family is terrified of me finding out about the accident." Reese sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. It sounded like sandpaper. "It's complicated," he muttered. "It's not complicated," I said. "A drunk driver hit us. He ran. You never caught him. That's the story." I watched his hands. They were trembling slightly. "Unless there was no driver." Reese looked up then, his expression crumbling. The waitress arrived with coffee, freezing the moment. We waited in silence while she poured black liquid into white mugs. As soon as she walked away, Reese leaned in close. "There was a driver," he whispered. "But he didn't run." The air in the diner seemed to vanish. "Woo," I demanded. Reese lowered his voice to a gravelly murmur. "Your brother. Julian." The name hit harder than the car had. He was 16. Learner's permit. It was raining, and he was arguing with your father. My hands gripped the table edge until my knuckles turned white. Julian. The golden boy. He hadn't just survived the crash, he had caused it. And he walked away clean while I served his life sentence. Why? The words scraped my throat. Reese stared into his black coffee. Reckless driving causing severe bodily injury, He would have gone to juvie. Maybe tried as an adult. Your father? He has friends. Rees grimaced, a flash of self-loathing crossing his face. They begged us. Said one son was already destroyed. Why lose both? They spun a story about a phantom truck. He looked at me then, pleading. I was 24, Felix. I just followed orders. A hollow sensation expanded in my chest. My entire life had been curated to protect Julian's future. My physical therapy, my pain, my struggle, that was all collateral damage they were willing to accept. They hadn't protected me from the truth. They had sacrificed me to it. I looked at the man across from me. He wasn't a savior. He was just another brick in the wall they built around me. You let me believe it was bad luck, I said. Rees reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small, silver USB drive and slid it across the sticky table. It looked innocuous, like something you'd find in a junk drawer. I shouldn't have this, he said, his voice barely audible over the clatter of silverware. It's the original scan. Unredacted. Before your dad made the calls. I covered the drive with my hand. It was cold metal against my sweating palm. I didn't thank him. I just took the ammunition. I sat in my apartment, the glow of the monitor painting my face in cold blue light. The USB drive hummed in the port. Opening the files felt like performing an autopsy on my own past. The PDF loaded slowly. There it was. Driver Julian Thorne. Speed 67 in a 35. Seeing the numbers in black and white made my stomach lurch. It wasn't a tragedy anymore. It was negligence. The document was a receipt for my stolen legs. But the police report was only half the equation. To sell a lie this big, they needed medical validation. They needed Dr. Patel. He had been our family physician since before I was born. He had signed the discharge papers. He had looked me in the eye and talked about traumatic amnesia. When I asked why I couldn't remember the other car, I pulled up a new browser tab. I didn't search for medical journals. I searched for money. Public records are a terrifying thing, if you know where to look. I spent 3 hours digging through property tax assessments and old hospital newsletters. My coffee went cold next to my keyboard. I needed to find a spike in income around October 2005. Doctors make good money, sure, but they don't usually pay cash for vacation homes a month after a patient gets paralyzed. I cross-referenced dates with a manic focus. The cursor blinked, mocking my desperation. Then I found it. It wasn't a house. It was buried in a digitized donor list for the Patel Community Clinic Initiative, archived on a municipal watchdog site. The Thorne Family Trust, $200,000. The date was the 3rd of November, 2005. Exactly 3 weeks after the crash. My parents were comfortable, but they weren't wealthy. That was my college fund. That was the insurance payout. They hadn't just protected Julian. They had liquidated my future to buy Dr. Patel's silence. The betrayal tasted like copper in my mouth. That money could have bought me a better chair, an accessible apartment, or specialized therapy. Instead, it bought a pristine record for Julian. I stared at the entry until the pixels blurred. Dr. Patel had accepted a bribe disguised as a charitable donation to his own project. It was smart. It was clean. And it was undeniably illegal. I took a screenshot, saving it to 3 different cloud servers. I had them. My phone buzzed on the desk, vibrating against the wood like an angry hornet. The screen lit up with a photo of Julian and me from a ski trip, years before the wheels. Incoming call, Julian. The timing was almost comedic. I stared at his smiling face, the pixels bright and cheerful. He was probably calling to check if I was still acting weird. I picked up the phone. my thumb hovering over the accept button. I needed to hear him. "Hey, little brother," Julian said. His voice was casual, light, completely unburdened by the $250,000 secret I was looking at. "Mom said you stormed out of dinner. You okay?" I looked at the police report on one screen and the donation receipt on the other. "I am fine, Julian," I said, my voice terrifyingly steady. "Just tired." I didn't hang up. I let him talk, listening to the silence between his words, where the guilt should have been. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor made my ears pop. I clutched the manila folder, sweat warping the cardboard. Rebecca Vance's firm was in a glass tower that looked down on the city like a judgment. I had liquidated my savings to afford the retainer. It was a massive gamble. I wheeled into the reception area, where the silence was expensive and the marble floors were polished to a mirror shine. I didn't belong here, but the evidence in my lap certainly did. Rebecca Vance didn't rise when I entered. She sat behind a desk wide enough to land a plane on, reviewing documents with laser focus. She gestured to the spot opposite her. No chair. Just open space for my wheels. "You said you have a smoking gun, Mr. Thorne," she said, finally looking up. Her eyes were gray and devoid of warmth. "I don't bill for socializing." "Show me." I slid the folder across the mahogany. She opened it, her expression unreadable as she scanned the police report. She flipped through the pages quickly, a manicured nail tapping against the paper. When she reached the screenshot of the donation to Dr. Patel, her hand stopped. A small, predatory smile touched her lips. "This isn't just malpractice," she murmured. "This is fraud. Conspiracy." She looked at me, assessing my resolve. Most people take a settlement when they find this kind of dirt. They want a payout. Is that what you want? Because if you just want money, you're wasting my time. Her directness cut through the emotional fog. "I don't want their money," I said, my voice echoing in the large office. "I want the record corrected. I want the seal broken." Rebecca closed the folder with a sharp snap. "Good. The statute of limitations on the injury is tricky, but fraud tolls the clock." She leaned back, steeping her fingers. "We don't sue for damages yet. We file an emergency motion to unseal juvenile records based on criminal misconduct. We force them to defend the lie in open court." Watching her draft the motion was like watching a surgeon prep for an amputation. She moved with efficient, lethal precision. By the time I left her office, the paperwork was filed electronically. The digital timestamp felt like a declaration of war. I rolled out of the building into the late afternoon sun, feeling exposed. There was no going back now. The legal system is a slow machine. But Rebecca Vance had just redlined the engine. I checked my phone. It was silent, but I knew that peace was temporary. But the explosion happened 48 hours later. I was in my kitchen making toast when my phone started vibrating across the counter. It wasn't a text. It was a deluge. First my mother, then my father, then Julian. The screen lit up with their names in a frantic strobe. They had been served. The facade of the happy family had been breached by a process server. I didn't answer. I just watched the phone dance. The buzzing sound vibrating through the granite countertop like a warning drill. A different number flashed on the screen. Rebecca's office. I answered immediately. "They've responded," she said, her voice sounding almost giddy. "They hired Charles Whitmore. He's the most expensive defense attorney in the state." My stomach dropped. "I can't outspend them," I admitted. "You don't have to," Rebecca replied. "I am refunding your retainer. I am taking this on contingency." I paused, confused. "Why?" Because Whitmore beat me on a technicality 3 years ago, she said coldly. And I really enjoy destroying his weekends. The county courthouse was a monolith of limestone and dread. I navigated the accessibility ramp, the vibration of the concrete traveling up my spine, like a warning tremor. Rebecca walked beside me, her heels clicking a sharp, martial rhythm on the slate. Inside, the air smelled of stale coffee, floor wax, and anxiety. We entered courtroom 4B, and the heavy oak doors swung shut, sealing us in. My parents were already there. They sat in the front row, huddled together, like refugees from a disaster they had caused. Julian wasn't with them. His absence felt calculated. Charles Whitmore intercepted us before we reached the plaintiff's table. He looked exactly like his reputation-expensive suit. Manicured hands and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He didn't acknowledge me. He spoke directly to Rebecca, lowering his voice to a confidential murmur. There is no need for this theater, Rebecca. My clients are prepared to offer a comprehensive settlement. He slid a folded piece of paper across the counsel table. $3 million. Structured payout. Plus a trust for medical expenses. It was a fortune. It was a bribe. It was the price of my silence. I didn't even look at the paper. The number didn't matter, because you can't buy back 19 years of reality. My father finally turned his head, his eyes pleading with me to take the lifeline. He wanted me to be reasonable so he could go back to being righteous. I felt a surge of cold, clarifying anger. Rebecca didn't need to ask me. She pushed the paper back toward Whitmore with a single finger. My client isn't here for a payday, Charles. He's here for the truth. We're proceeding. Whitmore's smile vanished instantly, replaced by professional disdain. Judge Sterling took the bench. A woman with reading glasses perched on a nose that had seen too many lies. Whitmore launched his opening salvo immediately. He painted a portrait of a family in crisis, making impossible choices to protect a traumatized 9-year-old boy. He used words like fragile mental state and parental discretion. It was a masterful performance. Slept. He made their conspiracy sound like an act of sacrificial love. I sat there gripping my wheels, listening to him rewrite history. He wasn't defending them against fraud, he was defending their right to gaslight me legally. Your Honor. Whitmore continued, his voice dripping with Fox sincerity. Unsealing these juvenile records serves no public interest. It only reopens old wounds for the entire family. Mr. Thorne is an adult now, but this motion is rooted in childhood trauma, not legal merit. I felt the familiar suffocation of my childhood home returning. They were doing it again. They were using my disability to silence me, framing my quest for truth as a symptom of my brokenness. I looked at my mother. She was weeping into a handkerchief, performing her grief for the court record. Rebecca stood up. She didn't use flowery language. She used ballistics. This isn't about trauma, Your Honor. It's about fraud. She projected the timeline onto the court monitors. The date of the accident. The date of the sealed report. And then, the kill shot. The bank transfer to Dr. Patel's clinic. Medical privacy laws protect patients, not perpetrators. The Thorne family didn't seal these records to protect Felix. They sealed them to hide a felony and a bribe. The air in the courtroom changed instantly. The sympathy evaporated, replaced by the sharp scent of scandal. Judge Sterling leaned forward, her glasses sliding down her nose. She stared at the financial records on the screen. Mr. Whitmore, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. Is this document authentic? Whitmore stammered, his polish cracking. We haven't had time to authenticate. This is ambush tactics. The judge ignored him. She looked at my parents. My father had gone pale, shrinking into his expensive wool coat. They weren't the respectable pillars of the community anymore. Under the harsh fluorescent lights of the courtroom, they were just people who had bought a lie and got caught. The ruling was swift and brutal. The court finds that the original sealing order was obtained under dubious circumstances. Judge Sterling declared. The interest of justice outweighs the privacy of the juvenile driver. She banged the gavel, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Motion granted. The records are unsealed effective immediately. Furthermore, I am referring the matter of the payment to Dr. Patel to the district attorney's office for review. Rebecca squeezed my shoulder. It wasn't a hug. It was a victory lap. We hadn't just won the files. We had started a criminal investigation. The courtroom began to clear, a bustle of clerks and bailiffs. My parents stood up slowly, looking dazed. My father turned toward me before they left. For the first time in my life, he didn't look at me with pity or disappointment. He looked at me with fear. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to offer another excuse. But I turned my chair away. I didn't need to hear his voice. The silence between us was no longer a secret to be kept. It was a verdict that I had finally delivered. The unsealed box sat on my dining table, like a radioactive core. I opened the mail envelope with a letter opener, slicing through the last barrier of their deception. The medical notes were typed in harsh, clinical courier font. Dr. Patel's observations were dated October 16, 2005. Parents adamant that patient not be informed of siblings' role in accident. Have agreed to support narrative of external driver to minimize family trauma. There it was. The conspiracy wasn't implied, it was documented. They had prescribed ignorance as a treatment plan. Reading further, the clinical detachment made me nauseous. They had tracked my psychological state not to help me heal, but to monitor the stability of the lie. Every time I had cried about the unfairness of the hit and run, Dr. Patel had noted it as patient accepting narrative successfully. I wasn't a son to them. I was a project to be managed. A containment zone for Julian's guilt. I closed the file. The anger that rose up wasn't hot. It was absolute zero. I knew exactly what to do next. I met Sarah Jenkins at a dive bar, where the music was loud enough to mask conversations. She was an investigative reporter for the city paper, known for burying corrupt city councilmen. I slid the heavy dossier across the scared wooden table. Everything is there, I said. The police report, the bribe, the medical cover. Up, she opened it, her skepticism vanishing as she saw the bank transfer receipts. This destroys them, Felix, she warned. Looking up, once this runs, there is no walking it back. I nodded. Burn it down. The article went live on Sunday morning, with a headline that screamed from the screen. The price of perfection. How one family bought a Lee. My phone started buzzing before I finished my coffee. It wasn't just local news. The internet devoured the story. The irony of a wealthy family sacrificing a disabled child for their golden boy was too perfect for the news cycle to ignore. I watched the share count climb. 10,000, 50,000. Comments poured in, a digital mob demanding justice. I sat in silence. By Tuesday, the consequences were physical. A news van was parked on my parents' lawn. My mother's garden club revoked her membership via a public Facebook post. The state medical board suspended Dr. Patel's license pending an emergency hearing. The clinic he had built with my hush money was now a crime scene swarming with investigators. I watched the footage on mute. Seeing my father shout, no comment, at a camera while shielding his face felt like watching a stranger. The man who controlled everything was finally losing control. Julian took the hardest hit. His tech company prided itself on radical transparency, a slogan that now looked grotesque next to his mugshot from the police report. They fired him before noon on Monday. His engagement was broken off by a press release from his fiancée's family. The golden boy had turned into lead. I felt a phantom sensation in my legs, a ghost of the pain I had carried for 19 years. It wasn't healing, but the weight was shifting. They were finally carrying their share of the load. Thursday brought a thunderstorm and a pounding at my door. I checked the camera feed. It was Julian. He looked wrecked, unshaven, soaking wet, his eyes manic. I debated calling the police, but some old instinct made me unlock the deadbolt. I didn't open the door fully. I just cracked it, the chain still engaged. "Let me in, Felix," he rasped. The charm was gone, eroded by 4 days of public shaming. "We need to talk. You can't just hide in there while you ruin my life." "I didn't ruin your life," I said through the gap. "I just told the truth about it." Julian slammed his hand against the wood. "It was a mistake! I was 16. I was a kid." His voice cracked, high and desperate. "Do you have any idea what it's like to lose everything in a week?" The lack of self-awareness was breathtaking. He truly believed he was the victim. He honestly thought his week of bad press equated to my 19 years in a chair. He was incurable. "I lost my legs, Julian," I said, my voice quiet and flat. "I lost the ability to walk, to run, to live without assistance. And you took my reality too." He stopped banging. His breath hitched in the wet air. "We protected you," he whispered, clinging to the lie until the end. "You protected yourself," I corrected. "And now you are unprotected." I slammed the door. I threw the deadbolt. The sound was final. I waited for him to scream or kick, but there was only the sound of rain. I rolled back to the living room. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a hollow exhaustion in its wake. My family was gone. Not dead, but erased from my future. The bridge wasn't just burned, I had nuked the canyon. I picked up the remote and turned off the television, silencing the news cycle I had created. The apartment was silent. But for the first time, it didn't feel empty. It felt clean. The ghosts were gone. I was alone, but I was finally real. 3 months had passed since the article ran. My apartment was no longer a command center for vengeance. It was just a home again. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. I wheeled to the window, watching the autumn leaves swirl on the pavement below. No news vans remained. The world had moved on to the next scandal, leaving me in the wreckage I had created. But wreckage can be cleared. I turned back to the kitchen counter, where a single white envelope lay waiting. It had no return address, but I knew the handwriting. It was from my mother. The loops of the F in Felix were distinctive, practiced and elegant, just like her public persona. I had ignored her calls, blocked her emails, and returned her packages unopened. This one had slipped through, sliding under my door like a final plea. I picked it up, feeling the texture of the expensive paper. It smelled faintly of her lavender perfume. That scent used to mean safety to me. Now, it just smelled like desperation and the cloying sweetness of a lie that refused to die. I slit the envelope open. A single sheet of stationery fell out. "We loved you too much to hurt you." The first line read. I stopped there. The ink was shaky, betraying a tremble she would never show in public. They still didn't get it. They thought love was a justification for theft. They thought 19 years of gaslighting could be smoothed over with a heartfelt note about intentions. I didn't read the rest. I didn't need to know how they justified the unjustifiable. The explanation didn't matter anymore. I held the corner of the paper over the gas burner on my stove. I clicked the igniter. The blue flame flared to life with a soft sound. The paper curled instantly, browning at the edges before catching fire. I watched the words turn to ash. Love. Blackened and crumbled into the burner grate. I didn't feel a surge of triumph. I didn't feel a pang of regret. I just felt the heat on my fingertips, real and immediate. It was the only warmth I needed from them now. I washed the ash down the sink and grabbed my jacket. I had plans. Not a deposition, not a strategy meeting, just coffee with a friend from the design firm. I checked my reflection in the hallway mirror. The lines of tension around my eyes had finally softened. The anger that had fueled me for months was gone, leaving a space I was learning to fill with other things. I unlocked the door and rolled out into the hallway. The wheels hummed on the carpet, a steady, rhythmic sound. The air outside was crisp and cold. I navigated the curb cut with practiced ease, merging into the flow of pedestrians. A few people glanced at the chair, but their eyes didn't linger. I wasn't a tragic victim, or the vengeful son. To them, I was just a man in a coat heading downtown. I looked at the traffic passing by, cars moving in a chaotic stream. The truth hadn't given me my legs back. But as I pushed forward, I knew I was finally the one steering.